On March 11th, 2011, a massive earthquake struck just off the coast of northeastern Japan. It was the tsunami that followed that no one had predicted. In an instant, an estimated 19,000 people lost their lives. As a journalist who's covered many natural disasters, this one was unique. Never before had I seen so much destruction in a country so advanced. The 2 million people who live in Fukushima prefecture, however, thought they were protected from the destruction on the coast. They were wrong. The wave had hit the nuclear power plant at Fukushima. The damage it caused sparked a reaction that would dwarf the tsunami and potentially threaten more lives. Pumps that cooled the nuclear reactors had stopped. The backup systems failed. Although the Japanese government would take months to admit it, the Fukushima plant had gone into meltdown. One year on, and Mrs. Ohashi is taking her children to the doctor. Kana, the eldest, Kazuaki, her son, and the youngest, Manna. They've been sick frequently over the last 12 months. Nosebleeds, diarrhea, sore throats, symptoms that disappeared when they went away, but returned when they came back to Fukushima.
The eldest one went away during the summer. When she came back in November, she had mouth blisters. But from mid-December, when she went away again, the blisters went away.
On a sheet, she lists the symptoms. Before the tsunami, she says the kids were all in very good health. Now they're picking up every little bug going around. The clinic is also a special one, set up by volunteers who feel the state-run medical services are not taking their problems seriously. Dr. Yamazaki is a specialist in the medical effects of radiation exposure. He's made several visits to Chernobyl to meet the victims of the disaster there. The consultation begins. Mrs. Ohashi explains her daughter's been suffering from chest pains. She has too. She thinks it might be stress. She's not sure, but it's so much pain. Dr. Yamazaki goes through the symptoms one by one. He warns Mrs. Ohashi about watching what the kids eat. External exposure is one thing, but eating contaminated food could expose internal organs to radiation. Dr. Yamazaki mentions the thyroid gland in particular. This is very sensitive to radiation, particularly for children. It's a busy day for Dr. Yamazaki. Thyroid is a big problem for the young.
Yes.
During a short break, he takes me through the Ohashi children's symptoms. Symptoms he's seen all over Fukushima prefecture.
From my experience, in a wide area, many children in Fukushima and the greater Tokyo area were complaining of similar symptoms in March.
And how do the levels of radiation here compare to what he's seen in Chernobyl?
Koriyama and Fukushima exceed that level. Chernobyl's high radiation areas measure 12 or 13 times as high as we're seeing here. But there are parts of Koriyama and Fukushima which are 40 times as high as it is here.
40倍ぐらいあります。
The meltdown at Fukushima's reactors caused a huge buildup of hydrogen. In the days following the disaster, reactors 1, 2, and 3 saw explosions. Dr. Tetsuji Imanaka, a nuclear scientist who works at Kyoto University's test reactor, knew immediately what was going on. Radioactive gases were being released.
In case of Fukushima, this is a meltdown accident, and the core itself didn't explode. So gaseous radionuclides and volatile radionuclides mainly escaped from the melted core. So the main radionuclides of contamination around Fukushima is cesium and iodine.
Unlike the Chernobyl disaster that Dr. Imanaka has studied extensively, the spread of nuclear material was not from the explosion itself. Instead, carried by the steam from overheating reactors, the irradiated elements were lifted into the air.
The contamination level in Tokyo, I think people do not leave Tokyo now. But Fukushima city is somewhat serious.
In the days that followed the tsunami, the Fukushima reactors started to go into meltdown. That in turn released clouds of radioactive cesium and iodine into the atmosphere. The wind was blowing to the west and eventually down to the south, scattering that material all over Fukushima prefecture and down towards Tokyo. What made it even worse was that it snowed over that period, and as the snow settled and melted over the months to come, the radioactive material slowly seeped into the ground. The iodine was not such a problem. That decays quickly, leaving little trace. But the cesium has a half-life of 30 years, the period it'll take to lose half of its strength. Tracking the spread of that cesium has become the personal crusade of Dr. Shinzo Kimura.
If the radiation is really high, around 2 or 3 microsieverts, then that is a hotspot. And I start surveying the land to find out if there are any residents.
Dr. Kimura made a startling discovery. As he traveled around Fukushima, he found hotspots of radiation, areas where readings on his instruments were much higher than expected. By feeding the information from his Geiger counter into a computer, he's been able to build up a map of radiation levels far greater than anything the government has produced so far. It is time-consuming and costly. The equipment alone costs tens of thousands of dollars, and it's a lonely path he walks. He was forced to resign his job with a government research lab after he was told this research was not considered important. Today, he relies on locals to donate what they can so he can carry on his work. Radiation levels are high, about 20 times normal background radiation, but well within government safety limits. Then he hits a hotspot. The Geiger counter starts to climb. Before the disaster, normal background radiation in this area was about 0.03 microsieverts per hour. This reading is over 200 times that.
There are many similar locations in this region, and they measure high radiation levels as well. Like this place. It's generally in areas where water has flowed down from the mountains.
Dr. Kimura tells me he's found many areas like this, places that go unnoticed by government monitoring, which takes aerial readings and general measurements. But he doesn't want to scare people away.
Of course it is dangerous. But if people leave this region one by one, their 1,000-year-old long history, tradition, culture, and community will vanish because of the nuclear disaster. It is better if we find a way for them to keep on living here safely, so that they can pass on their traditions to the next generation.
He explains to pickle manufacturer Chuhei Sakai how to remove the topsoil, taking the cesium with it. But there are complicated equations to be done, not easy science for a farmer to grasp. And it's just one man and thousands of square kilometers of contamination. There are some areas, however, that have been abandoned. The exclusion zone around the plant. Today, the only people inside are those working to make the crippled nuclear plant safe.
This is the beginning of the exclusion zone that surrounds the Fukushima nuclear power plant. It stretches in a 20-kilometer semicircle all the way around to the other side of the coast with the reactors at the very center. The Japanese government says that radiation levels inside is too high to sustain normal daily life. And according to the policeman here, beyond this point, there's not a single soul living inside.
Here, radiation levels are surprisingly low. This checkpoint is directly north of the plant, and it's only about 7 times normal background levels, well within safe limits. But we would discover for ourselves that the further you are from the plant doesn't necessarily mean you're safer. As we headed towards Fukushima City, our own Geiger counter sounded an alarm. This was nearly 60 kilometers from the plant.
We were just driving back to our hotel and the alarm on our Geiger counter started going off. We're just on the edge of Fukushima City and the reading on here is 1.83 microsieverts per hour. Now that's about 10 times as high as the reading we've just been getting on the very edge of the exclusion zone around the Fukushima nuclear reactor. We're quite some distance away and we're on the edge of a very populated city.
The traffic that rushed past carried commuters heading home, but this was 100 times normal radiation. The once bustling city of Fukushima appears to have fallen quiet. Popular tourist attractions now lie empty. Those that can leave have done so, although many are still tied by family and financial links that can't be broken. For those who stay, there are some practical measures they can take. The Ito family live outside Fukushima City. They've come to visit the area's only radiation test facility. It's a nerve-wracking experience for their kids, but the results will not only show external exposure, but also how much irradiated produce they've consumed. There's clearly some discomfort amongst the local authorities too. Having allowed our cameras into the test van, they change their mind and make our team wait outside. They've been criticized for not providing enough test facilities in areas where people desperately need them. Back at the clinic in Aizu, a meeting to discuss ways to stay safer. Mrs. Ohashi has come back to the surgery to join a meeting of concerned parents. Many have actually moved here from Fukushima. Radiation levels are lower. They swap stories, reluctantly at first, but then with growing conviction. They talk about their fears. They don't want to let their children outside. They worry about the food they eat, what's safe for their kids to do. Mrs. Ohashi listens intently as similar tales of unexplained sickness come spilling out. It's clear that many of the parents just don't know where to turn for help.
We moved here in March. My daughter is a junior high student, and she had diarrhea for nearly a month. I thought it could be because of the stress of moving. She's at that age. She moved here without being able to properly say goodbye to her friends. Her diarrhea went away around April and May, and now she has no symptoms. But my daughter in first grade had a massive nosebleed. I thought it was because of the hot weather.
暑いからかなとか考えたいじゃないですか。そうでもそう考える自分が嫌なんですけど、なんか物事の本質をこう見ないようにしてるんじゃないかっていう。
At least, that's what I had hoped. But that makes me think I'm avoiding the reality of what's happening. It made me think that maybe I'm not living up to my responsibilities as a mother.
親もいるし、友達みんなそこで生活していて、だから私がなんだろう。And
although I'm here, my heart is in Fukushima City. My parents are there, my friends are there. Moving away made me feel as if I was abandoning them.
否定してしまう。あ、ごめんなさい。
すごくわかるよね。
だから、わかんない。なんかこうニュートラルに
I want to be as neutral as possible and look at this situation scientifically, but there's part of me that cannot do that.
自分の間でちょっとこう。
It's a situation that triggers a parent's greatest fears, powerless against an enemy they can't see, hear, or feel. An enemy who could strike tomorrow or 20 years from now, and there's nowhere to hide. Of course, Japan knows only too well the horror of nuclear power. Shuntaro Hida was 6 kilometers away from the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. A medical doctor, he treated the victims of the immediate aftermath and those that suffered the long-term after effects in the years that followed. His career has been devoted to the study of radiation sickness. Does he think the symptoms being seen in Fukushima are due to radiation?
I know these are the symptoms of radiation. In the case of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the radiation was extreme, so you wouldn't see such symptoms. But similar symptoms were observed in those who were far away from the center of the blast, 5, 10, even 15 kilometers away.
He strongly opposes the safe levels of exposure that are currently being advocated by the Japanese government. They're dictated, he says, not by safety standards, but by a nuclear industry that wields far too much power, and not just in Japan.
At the root of the problem is US nuclear policy, which asserts that a small intake of radiation is harmless. Japan is, in a way, still occupied by the USA. And politically always acts in a way that will get US approval. If they said even a little bit of exposure will have certain effects, it's going to create a whole lot of problems, which is why they won't.
The potential threat is enormous. More than 40 million people live within a 300-kilometer radius of the crippled Fukushima plant. Elevated levels of radiation have been found in most of those areas, although the government says they're still well within safety boundaries. But this is the sort of radiation exposure an ordinary person gets from an aeroplane flight or an X-ray. Is there any way to know what's safe? Japan's National Institute of Radiological Studies is in the midst of a 4-year test on rats and mice to determine what damage exposure to low levels of radiation can cause. Although their research is not yet complete, they've already made some dramatic findings. Animals exposed at the neonatal stage, just after birth, are far more vulnerable. In effect, until the organs are fully formed, low-level radiation exposure appears to be much more damaging. The researchers are keen to point out, however, that in a normal cell, the risk of damage is very low. But in rats that have a high likelihood of developing cancerous tumors, radiation exposure increases the risk considerably.
We use mice which are very predisposed to tumors, spontaneous tumors. We can easily induce the tumors at around 100 or 200 millisievert.
Given the similarity of the cells in the mice and rats to those in humans, would you believe that the human body would react in the same way when exposed to similar levels of radiation?
Some people must be very susceptible to radiation induction cancer. That means when we use the mouse model for that people, for that subpopulations, these mice are very good.
And it's now possible to see exactly how that damage affects humans. Osaka University Medical School has developed technology that can now identify exactly what harm is done to DNA by low-level exposure. Here, human blood samples are exposed for varying periods to radioactive cesium, the same element that's been scattered over Fukushima. The samples are then treated chemically to highlight the proteins created by damaged DNA. This shows exactly where the DNA helix has been broken. It's under the intense magnification of an electron microscope that the damage is revealed. And they've made an interesting discovery. In the past, it had been thought that low-level exposure to radiation was not particularly harmful. But the recent research suggests that the exposure time period is just as important as the strength of the dose.
Still, you can see the double standard break. It doesn't matter the radiation dose is lower and higher. So it depends on how much radiation are exposed.
But could she tell me whether the symptoms we'd seen in Fukushima were consistent with radiation exposure?
It's one possibility. One possibility, yes. But I think there are many other factors, like a very stressful situation.
The situation does, however, offer a golden opportunity to do more detailed research.
Now I really want to check the blood sample from people or some animal from this Fukushima area. It's very important, and we have to do this kind of check or analysis as soon as possible before, it's too late,
As yet, no one from the government has responded to requests for samples or access to Fukushima. So what is the Japanese government planning to do about the ongoing radiation issues? Under immense pressure since the disaster, one prime minister has fallen. His replacement is suffering at the polls. Noriyuki Shikata is the prime minister's spokesman. How do they see the current situation?
Well, in terms of possible impacts on health, besides or beyond Fukushima Prefecture, we don't think there is serious concerns. And our efforts are focused on Fukushima. Attention is being paid to the conditions, especially in the vicinity of Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant.
We've spoken to a lot of families. Many of them say they have children who are suffering from nosebleeds, from headaches, they can't sleep. In some cases they've got lumps or tumours. It's starting to emerge. They say that the government and doctors in the area are not listening to them. They're just saying these are stress-related problems. Do you take these claims seriously?
Of course, we have to pay attention to individual cases, and we cannot disregard, some of the situations. If there are concrete, cases, we have to analyze, what are the causes. I do not deny, that there is the massive, the additional efforts, that are required, to resolve this issue.
At this stage, that's a terrible admission, isn't it?
My perspective is that, the government is taking, very, comprehensive measures. But of course, there could be cases where those measures may not be, reaching. If those kind of cases exist, we need to be attentive, to those needs.
It's not exactly what the Ohashi family wants to hear, but they're taking matters into their own hands. Mrs. Ohashi is preparing dinner. She uses only produce she's certain has come from far away. The government says these things are safe, she tells me, but she just doesn't want to think about it anymore. She's too tired. And the kids are playing, but they're locked inside. Kazuaki still has flu, and Mrs. Ohashi doesn't want to take any chances. They won't be allowed to play outside until the school holidays come and the family can take a holiday far away. But high in the mountains, above the reach of the radiation scattered below, is one small sanctuary. Naoyuki Hashiguchi is doing his regular checks. He knows the levels here are low, but he's leaving nothing to chance.
Today the level is way below 0.1, so it's very low, and far lower than most areas around here.
And then they arrive. This is only the third time these children have been allowed to play outside since the disaster struck. The excitement and release of being in the open air is clear to see. The trip, set up by an organization called Let's Play Outside, is aimed at giving the kids a chance to play without the fear of radiation exposure.
The pain the children have gone through is so great that I could never even begin to understand it. But there are also many children who are suffering today from the long-term impact of radiation.
The children are clearly thrilled. It doesn't take long before they're lost in the fun and games. But Mr. Hashiguchi knows it'll only last for a few hours, and then they'll have to return to reality.
Children know that Fukushima is going through very difficult times, and for their own families. Their parents might lose their jobs. They might have to move or change school, or even evacuate. Children have to deal with tremendous stress and worry. They have no hope.
The children of Fukushima, a generation scarred by the tsunami wave.